Have you ever looked at someone who is incredibly successful, a world-class athlete, a brilliant CEO, or a master musician, and thought to yourself, they must have been born with something I don't have? It's a natural reaction. We often see the finish line of someone's journey and assume their victory was written in their DNA. We call it talent, and we use it to explain away why some people reach the top while others, who might seem just as bright or capable, end up falling short. But what if that assumption is actually holding you back? What if the most important factor in your success isn't your IQ, your genetics, or your luck, but something much more within your control? Welcome to this exploration of a concept that is changing the way we think about achievement. Today, we are diving deep into the ideas presented in the book Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. In this work, author Angela Duckworth challenges the traditional obsession we have with talent and introduces us to the real driver of long-term success, grit. Throughout this summary, we are going to look at why showing up, day after day, matters so much more than how gifted you are when you start. We'll explore the idea that grit isn't just about working hard, it's a specific combination of having a deep, long-term passion and the unwavering perseverance to stick with it, even when things get boring or difficult. You will learn that high achievers aren't necessarily those who have a natural knack for something, but those who have developed a special kind of stamina. The purpose of this book is to show you that your potential is one thing, but what you actually do with that potential is entirely another. We'll look at the high-level ideas that grit can be grown, that effort actually counts twice in the equation of success, and that interest, practice, purpose, and hope are the four pillars that keep a gritty person moving forward. This isn't just about professional success, it's about how you approach your life's goals and how you handle the inevitable setbacks that come your way. By the end of this summary, you'll have a new lens through which to view your own abilities and a roadmap for how to cultivate the persistence needed to reach your most ambitious goals. If you find this summary helpful and want to support more content like this, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Main summary: the anatomy of grit and why effort matters most. When we look at high performers, our culture tends to lean into the talent myth. We love the idea of the natural, the person who picks up a violin or a basketball and is immediately better than everyone else. Angela Duckworth argues that this obsession with talent is actually a hidden form of defensive thinking. By labeling someone as a genius or naturally gifted, we give ourselves permission to let our own performance slide. After all, if they were born that way and we weren't, there's no point in competing, right? But the book suggests that this focus is fundamentally flawed. When we focus only on talent, we ignore the most important variable in the success equation: effort. While talent is certainly real, it's the rate at which you improve when you invest effort. It is not the final word on what you can achieve. The core of grit is the understanding that someone who works harder can eventually overtake someone who has more natural ability but lacks the drive to refine it. One of the most profound realizations in the book is that while talent helps you build skill more quickly, skill itself does not guarantee achievement. Achievement only happens when you take those skills and apply them consistently over a long period. This requires a level of endurance that most people underestimate. It's not just about the intensity of your work on any given day, it's about the consistency over time that defines a gritty individual. Now we move to the next point, which explores the specific mathematical way effort shapes our success. To truly understand why grit is more important than talent, we have to look at how achievement is actually constructed. Duckworth proposes two simple equations. First, talent x effort equals skill. This means that when you apply effort to your natural abilities, you develop skills. If you have a natural ear for music, talent, and you spend hours practicing, effort, you become a skilled musician. However, the second equation is where the magic happens: skill x effort equals achievement. Notice that effort appears in both equations. This is why the author says effort counts twice. A person with less talent but more effort will eventually develop the same level of skill as a talented person who is lazy. But then, the less talented but grittier person continues to apply effort to that skill, which leads to actual achievement. The talented person who doesn't work hard stays in the skill phase and never actually produces anything of lasting value. This is important because it shifts our focus from what we are to what we do. It tells us that we aren't stuck with a fixed level of potential. If you feel like you aren't the smartest person in the room, you can still outachieve the smartest person by simply being the one who stays in the game the longest. This doesn't mean talent doesn't matter at all. It just means that without effort, talent is nothing more than unmet potential. It is the constant application of your skills that leads to meaningful results, whether that's writing a book, building a business, or mastering a craft. Now we move to the next point, where we dive into the internal psychological traits that make a person gritty in the first place. Grit isn't just a vague feeling of wanting it more. According to the research, there are 4 specific psychological assets that gritty people share, and the first one is interest. You cannot be gritty about something you don't actually care about. Passion begins with intrinsically enjoying what you do. However, a common misconception is that passion is like a bolt of lightning that just hits you one day. In reality, passion is something that is discovered and then fostered over time. Gritty people spend time exploring different interests until they find something that truly resonates with them. Once they find that seed of interest, they spend years deepening it. They don't get bored easily because they find ways to stay curious about the nuances of their work. They understand that mastery isn't a straight line, it's a series of small, incremental discoveries. To be gritty, you must be willing to engage in your chosen field with a level of depth that others might find tedious. This leads directly into the second asset, practice. But it's not just any practice, it's what researchers call deliberate practice. Gritty people are never satisfied with staying at their current level. They specifically seek out their weaknesses and work on them. While most people enjoy doing the things they are already good at, the person with grit intentionally focuses on the parts of their skill set that are the most difficult and frustrating. They embrace the stretch and the discomfort because they know that is where growth happens. This type of practice requires an intense level of focus and a willingness to fail, receive feedback, and try again immediately. Now we move to the next point, focusing on the final 2 pillars that sustain long-term perseverance, purpose and hope. While interest and practice get you started, purpose is what keeps you going for decades. Gritty people have a sense that their work matters, not just to them, but to others. They connect their personal goals to a larger cause. This sense of purpose acts as a powerful motivator during the inevitable dip in any journey. When things get hard, having a why that is bigger than yourself provides the fuel to keep pushing. It's the difference between seeing your job as laying bricks versus building a cathedral. Finally, there is hope. In the context of grit, hope isn't about wishing for things to get better, it's a persevering hope that stems from the belief that your own efforts can improve your future. This is closely related to having a growth mindset. Gritty individuals don't see failure as a permanent state. When they hit a wall, they don't think, "I'm not good enough." Instead, they think, "I haven't figured this out yet." This psychological resilience allows them to get back up after being knocked down. They have the stamina to stay hopeful even when the evidence suggests they should quit. Building on these internal pillars, it is important to understand that grit is not a fixed trait you are simply born with or without. One of the most empowering takeaways from Duckworth's research is that grit can be grown in 2 ways, from the inside out and from the outside in. We've already touched on the internal work, developing your interests, practicing deliberately, finding purpose, and maintaining hope. But the outside-in approach is just as critical because it acknowledges that our environment, our mentors, and our culture play a massive role in how much perseverance we develop. For many, the journey of growing grit begins in childhood, and this brings us to the concept of gritty parenting or gritty leadership. The book clarifies that being a supportive figure doesn't mean being easy on people. The most effective way to foster grit in others, whether you are a parent, a coach, or a manager, is to be both demanding and supportive at the same time. It's about setting incredibly high standards while providing the emotional and resource-based support needed to reach those standards. This combination creates an environment where failure isn't seen as a reason to stop, but as a necessary part of the learning process. When people feel that someone believes in their potential and is willing to help them through the struggle, they are far more likely to stick with difficult tasks. Now we move to the next point, which introduces a practical framework for building this endurance in everyday life, the hard thing rule. To make the development of grit more tangible, the author shares a personal family framework known as the hard thing rule. This rule is designed to help individuals, especially children, but also adults, practice the habit of follow-through. There are 3 main parts to this rule. First, everyone in the family has to do one hard thing. A hard thing is something that requires daily deliberate practice. It's not just a hobby, it's a commitment to improvement. Second, you cannot quit in the middle. You are allowed to stop, but only after the season is over, the tuition is up, or a natural milestone has been reached. You cannot quit on a bad day when you are frustrated or tired. The third part of the rule is that you get to pick your own hard thing. This is crucial because, as we mentioned earlier, grit requires interest. If you are forced into something you hate, you aren't building grit, you're just enduring misery. By choosing the challenge yourself, you take ownership of the struggle. This rule teaches the vital lesson that frustration is a temporary state. By forcing yourself to finish what you started, even when it's difficult, you build the psychological callus needed to handle the bigger challenges life will eventually throw at you. It turns perseverance into a habit rather than a one-time heroic act. Now we move to the next point, which examines how the people around us, our tribe, shape our level of grit. Beyond individual effort and parental support, the book explores the immense power of culture. There is a psychological phenomenon where we tend to adopt the traits of the group we belong to. If you want to be grittier, one of the most effective things you can do is join a gritty culture. When you are surrounded by people who wake up early, practice hard, and refuse to give up, their behavior becomes your normal. You stop asking yourself, should I keep going? And you start thinking, this is just what people like us do. This identity-based grit is far more sustainable than grit based on pure willpower. Willpower is a finite resource that can be exhausted, but identity is a core part of who you are. When grit becomes part of your identity, when you see yourself as a finisher or someone who shows up no matter what, then the act of persevering requires much less mental effort. The culture of an organization, a sports team, or even a friend group acts as a force multiplier for individual grit. It provides a social contract that encourages you to stay the course when your internal motivation might be flagging. Now we move to the next point, where we look at the specific way gritty people handle the concept of failure and the plateau of latent potential. A major differentiator for those with high grit is how they perceive the relationship between time and results. Most people expect progress to be linear. If they put in a certain amount of work, they expect a certain amount of reward immediately. When they hit a plateau where they are working hard but not seeing results, they often quit, assuming they've reached their limit. Gritty people, however, understand the concept of latent potential. They realize that the work they are doing today might not show results for months or even years. This relates back to the idea of hope we discussed earlier, but with a more practical edge. Gritty individuals are masters of low-level goals that serve a top-level goal. They view their lives as a hierarchy of objectives. At the very top is their ultimate compass, their life's mission. Beneath that are mid-level and low-level goals. While they are very flexible with their low-level goals, they might change their daily routine or try a different tactic. They are completely inflexible regarding their top-level goal. They don't switch paths every time a new shiny object or a difficult obstacle appears. They understand that to achieve something truly great, you have to stay in one direction for a very long time. Now we move to the next point, focusing on the grit scale and how we can measure and track our own progress. To help people understand where they stand, the book introduces the grit scale, a self-assessment tool used in Duckworth's research. This scale measures two distinct things, passion and perseverance. Interestingly, many people find they score high on one but low on the other. You might be incredibly hardworking, high perseverance, but jump from interest to interest every few months, low passion. Conversely, you might be deeply obsessed with a topic, high passion, but struggle to actually do the boring, daily work required to master it, low perseverance. The goal of measuring grit isn't to give yourself a permanent grade, but to identify which area needs more attention. If your passion score is low, you might need more time for sampling, exploring different interests until something clicks. If your perseverance score is low, you might need to implement something like the hard thing rule to build your follow-through muscle. The scale reminds us that grit is a multidimensional trait. It's not just about working hard, it's about working hard on the same thing for a long period of time. It reinforces the idea that greatness is the sum of many small, mundane acts, performed day after day without fail. Now we move to the next point, which discusses the intersection of grit and talent, and how to balance the two for maximum achievement. While the book heavily emphasizes grit, it does not suggest that talent is irrelevant. Instead, it suggests that talent is what you have, but grit is what you do with it. A common trap is what the author calls the gifted child syndrome. Often, children who are naturally talented at school or sports never learn how to work hard because everything comes easily to them at first. When they eventually hit a wall, which everyone does at some point, they lack the grit to push through it because they've never had to practice the art of struggling. This is why it is often the moderately talented individuals who end up being the most successful in the long run. Because they had to work for their early successes, they developed the psychological tools of grit. By the time they reach the higher levels of their field, where everyone is talented, their superior grit becomes their competitive advantage. The lesson here is that if you feel you have a natural gift, you must be doubly careful to cultivate grit. If you feel you lack a natural gift, take heart in the fact that your struggle is actually building the very trait that will eventually allow you to surpass the naturals. To further refine our understanding of grit, we need to look closer at the word passion. In our modern world, we often treat passion like a sudden spark or an intense feeling of excitement. We think of it as fire. However, the book argues that for the truly gritty, passion isn't about intensity, it's about consistency. It is less like a fire and more like a compass. A fire provides a lot of heat and light for a short time but eventually burns out. A compass, on the other hand, stays pointed in one direction, guiding you through every turn, every storm, and every long stretch of flat road. This is a vital distinction because many people quit when the intensity of their initial excitement fades. They mistake the end of the honeymoon phase for a lack of interest. Gritty people understand that the initial spark is just the beginning. Their passion is a quiet, steady commitment to a single direction over years and decades. It is about waking up and caring about the same thing today that you cared about yesterday and the day before that. This steady focus allows for the compounding effect of effort. When you stay on one path, your progress builds upon itself. When you jump from one passion to another, you are always starting over at the bottom of the learning curve, never reaching the level where your efforts truly begin to multiply. Now we move to the next point, which explores the psychological science behind hope and how we can train ourselves to be resilient. When things go wrong, and they inevitably will, the difference between those who stay gritty and those who give up often comes down to how they explain their failures to themselves. This is based on the concept of learned helplessness versus learned optimism. Through various studies, the book shows that when people believe their suffering or failure is caused by permanent, unchangeable factors, they stop trying. They learn to be helpless. However, gritty people practice a form of optimism where they see setbacks as temporary and specific. They don't say, "I'm a failure," they say, "I used the wrong strategy this time." This type of hope is a cognitive skill that can be developed. It involves a growth mindset, the belief that our basic qualities are things we can cultivate through effort. When you have a growth mindset, a mistake isn't a verdict on your intelligence, it's a piece of data telling you how to improve. The author notes that hope for a gritty person isn't about things magically getting better on their own. It is the deep-seated belief that I can make things better through my own actions. This sense of agency is what allows a person to suffer a major defeat, process the pain, and then get back to work the very next day. Now we move to the next point, where we examine how to organize our lives to support this long-term focus through a hierarchy of goals. To stay gritty, you need a clear internal map of what you are trying to achieve. The book suggests that we should view our goals in a hierarchy. At the bottom are our low-level goals, the items on our daily to-do list, like sending an email or going to a specific meeting. These are means to an end. Above them are mid-level goals, which are more significant projects. At the very top is your top-level goal, your ultimate concern or life's philosophy. This top-level goal is what gives meaning to everything below it. The problem many people face is that they have a fragmented hierarchy. They have many mid-level goals that don't actually lead to a single top-level goal, or they have a top-level goal but no clear low-level actions to get there. A gritty person has a very organized hierarchy. Their daily actions are all aligned with their life's mission. Furthermore, they are flexible at the bottom but stubborn at the top. They are willing to swap out, change, or abandon low-level goals if they find a better way to reach the top. However, they are completely unshakable when it comes to the top-level goal itself. This structure prevents them from being distracted by shiny objects that might be interesting but don't move the needle on their life's work. Now we move to the next point, focusing on how we can become wise mentors and leaders to help others develop grit. Whether we are parents, teachers, or managers, the way we encourage others matters. The book highlights the wise model of mentorship, which sits at the intersection of being demanding and supportive. If you are demanding but not supportive, you are an authoritarian who might get results in the short term, but you will likely cause burnout and resentment. If you are supportive but not demanding, you are permissive, which feels good but fails to challenge people to reach their potential. A wise mentor is someone who says, "I have high expectations for you, and I am here to help you meet them." This approach fosters grit because it validates the person's ability while acknowledging the difficulty of the task. It provides a secure base from which people feel safe to take risks and fail. When people know they are cared for, they are much more willing to endure the stretch of deliberate practice and the frustration of setbacks. This model shows that grit isn't developed through harshness or tough love alone, but through a combination of high standards and deep, unconditional support. Now we move to the next point, which discusses the relationship between grit and other character traits like happiness and virtue. Finally, it's worth asking, does being gritty actually make you a happier or better person? There is a common fear that if you are relentlessly focused on a goal, you might become miserable or selfish. However, the research in the book suggests the opposite. There is a strong positive correlation between grit and life satisfaction. People who have a sense of purpose and the perseverance to pursue it tend to feel more fulfilled than those who are drifting. Having a clear direction in life provides a sense of coherence and meaning that protects against despair. Additionally, the book distinguishes between self-oriented grit and other-oriented grit. While some people are gritty for their own fame or gain, the highest levels of grit are almost always associated with a desire to help others. This pro-social motivation is actually a powerful fuel for perseverance. When you believe your work makes a difference in the lives of others, you are less likely to quit when things get difficult. Grit, therefore, isn't just about getting ahead, it is a character trait that, when combined with a sense of purpose, leads to both personal flourishing and a positive impact on the world. As we bring our journey through the ideas of Angela Duckworth to a close, it is worth reflecting on how much your perspective on success might have shifted. We began by dismantling the talent myth, that pervasive idea that our achievements are predestined by our genetics or some innate genius. Through the lens of grit, we have seen that while talent is a real starting point, it is ultimately a secondary factor. The true engine of success is effort, which, as we've learned, counts twice in the mathematical journey toward achievement. The beauty of these findings is that they place the power back into your hands. If success were purely about talent, most of us would be stuck with whatever we were born with. But because success is driven by grit, it is something we can actively cultivate, refine, and grow. Whether you are working from the inside out by deepening your interests and practicing with deliberate focus, or from the outside and by surrounding yourself with a gritty culture and wise mentors, the path to becoming more resilient is open to everyone. We have explored the 4 pillars that sustain this endurance: interest, practice, purpose, and hope. These aren't just abstract concepts, they are practical tools. You now know that passion isn't a flash of lightning but a compass that guides you over the long haul. You understand that deliberate practice is the uncomfortable but necessary stretch that turns potential into skill. You've seen how connecting your work to a larger purpose provides the fuel to keep going when the initial excitement fades, and how a growth mindset provides the hope needed to see failure as a temporary detour rather than a dead end. Implementing the hard thing rule or organizing your life around a hierarchy of goals provides a structured way to turn these psychological insights into daily habits. It reminds us that grit is not about a single moment of heroism or a massive burst of energy. Instead, grit is the stamina to stay committed to a top-level goal for years, even when the progress feels slow and the work feels mundane. It is the ability to show up on your worst day with the same commitment you had on your best day. Ultimately, the story of grit is a hopeful one. It tells us that our potential is not a fixed ceiling but a vast landscape that we can explore through persistence. It suggests that the naturals may start faster, but the gritty are the ones who finish the race. As you move forward, remember that greatness is not the result of a single brilliant stroke, but the sum of many small, consistent actions performed with passion and perseverance. By staying focused on your compass and embracing the effort required to master your craft, you are building the very foundation of a successful and meaningful life.